You thought fear would break me. Now you will see what it started.
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers when my phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. I'd been under the hood of my beat-up Ford pickup for 3 hours, trying to coax life back into the engine that had been my faithful companion for 15 years. The garage smelled of motor oil and disappointment, pretty much the story of my life these days. "Jack Morrison," I answered, wiping my hands on an already filthy rag. "Mr. Morrison? This is Mercy General Hospital. Your son Samuel is in the emergency room. You need to come immediately." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Sir, I can't discuss details over the phone. Please come as soon as possible." I was already grabbing my keys, my heart hammering against my ribs like a caged animal. The 20-minute drive to Mercy General felt like 20 hours. My mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. Sam was 19, a sophomore at the local college, studying engineering like his old man had planned to do before life got in the way. The fluorescent lights in the ER waiting room made everyone look like corpses. I found Sam in bed 7, his left leg elevated in a temporary cast, his face a roadmap of bruises. But his eyes, those were what broke my heart. They held a mixture of pain and something else, shame. "Dad," he whispered, trying to sit up. "Easy there, champ. What the heck happened?" Sam looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "I went home early from Mike's party. Mom's car was in the driveway, but so was that black Mercedes, the one that belongs to her boss." My blood went cold. Richard Carson, senior partner at Blackwell, Carson & Associates, where my wife Elizabeth had been climbing the corporate ladder for the past 5 years. The man was everything I wasn't. Polished, wealthy, connected, and apparently screwing my wife. "I used my key to get in," Sam continued, his voice barely audible. "I heard noises from upstairs. From your bedroom, Dad. I went up and—" He swallowed hard. "They were, Jesus Christ. I lost it, Dad. I started yelling at him. Told him to get out of our house. Mom was screaming at me to leave, but I wouldn't, so Carson called his security guys. 2 of them came up from downstairs." "Security guys?" "Big guys in suits. They grabbed me, said I was trespassing. When I fought back, one of them shoved me down the stairs. That's how my leg got broken." The rage that built in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. Not even during my 2 tours in the Middle East had I experienced this level of pure, concentrated fury. I was a 42-year-old construction foreman who'd spent the last 20 years building other people's dreams while my own crumbled around me. But this was the final straw. "Where are they now?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Still at the house, I think. Dad, don't do anything stupid." But I was already walking toward the exit. "Get some rest, Sam. Everything's going to be fine." "Dad, wait." I didn't wait. I couldn't. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of working double shifts to pay for Elizabeth's law school, 20 years of being the supportive husband while she networked at country club events I couldn't afford to attend. And this was my reward. The drive home took 12 minutes. I kept my .357 Magnum in the glove compartment, a habit from my military days that Elizabeth had always hated. Tonight, I was grateful for it. Our house sat on Maple Street in what used to be the nice part of town before the steel mill closed and half the neighborhood moved away. The black Mercedes was still parked in my driveway, like a middle finger pointed directly at my face. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and stared at the house I'd been paying a mortgage on for 18 years. Every shingle I'd replaced myself, every room I'd painted, every broken pipe I'd fixed at 2 a.m. because we couldn't afford a plumber. The front door was unlocked. I could hear voices from upstairs, Elizabeth's sharp tone and Carson's deeper rumble. I climbed the stairs slowly, my work boots heavy on each step. They were in my bedroom, fully dressed now, but disheveled. Carson was a tall man in his mid-50s, silver-haired and handsome in that artificial way that expensive suits and regular spa treatments could provide. Elizabeth stood near the window, her dark hair mussed, her lipstick smeared. She looked beautiful and terrible at the same time. 2 men in dark suits flanked Carson like bookends, professional muscle, the kind that rich men hired to handle their dirty work. "Well, well," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Looks like I missed the party." Elizabeth spun around, her face going pale. "Jack, what are you doing here?" "Funny thing about that, Liz. Got a call from the hospital. Seems our son had an accident. Broken leg. Happened right here in our house." Carson straightened his tie, trying to look dignified. Morrison, this is a private matter between adults. Your son was out of line. Out of line? I stepped into the room, and both security guards tensed. In his own house? Finding his mother's boss screwing around in his father's bed? Jack, please, Elizabeth said, but there was no remorse in her voice, just annoyance at being caught. How long? I asked her. How long what? How long have you been with him? One of the security guards moved forward. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to calm down. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was younger than me, probably 35, built like a linebacker but soft around the edges, the kind of guy who'd gotten his training from a manual instead of a battlefield. You know what's funny? I said conversationally. 20 years ago, I was kicking down doors in Kandahar. You know what I learned over there? Rich men's muscle is usually just for show. I pulled the .357 from my waistband, not pointing it at anyone, just letting them see it. The room went dead silent. Jesus, Jack, Elizabeth shrieked. Relax, sweetheart. I'm not going to shoot anyone. That would be too easy. I looked at Carson. You like games, Dick? Let's play one. It's called Get the Heck Out of My House. Now see here, Carson started. On your hands and knees. What? You heard me. You want to act like a dog, you can crawl like one. Hands and knees out of my bedroom, down the stairs, and out the front door. The security guards looked uncertain. They were paid to intimidate, not to get into firefights with crazy ex-soldiers. This is ridiculous, Carson sputtered. I'm calling the police. Good idea. I'm sure they'd love to hear about how your boys put my kid in the hospital. Now crawl, or I start making holes in expensive suits. What happened next was the most satisfying 30 seconds of my adult life. Richard Carson, senior partner, pillar of the community, got down on his hands and knees and crawled out of my bedroom like the dog he was. His security guards followed, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I herded them downstairs and out the front door, where half the neighborhood had gathered to watch the show. Mrs. Dalrymple from next door had her phone out, recording everything. Perfect. Jack, you've lost your mind, Elizabeth screamed from the porch. I turned to face her, and for a moment I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with 23 years ago, young, ambitious, full of fire. But that woman was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. Maybe I have, Liz, but at least I found it in time. Carson was trying to dust off his expensive suit, his face red with humiliation. You'll pay for this, Morrison. I'll destroy you. Get in line, I told him. Seems like everyone's trying to do that these days. As the Mercedes pulled out of my driveway, I caught Elizabeth's eye. She was staring at me with something I'd never seen before. Fear. This isn't over, Jack. No, I agreed. It's just getting started. The next morning brought consequences faster than a hangover. I was on my second cup of coffee, sitting at the kitchen table I'd built with my own hands, when Elizabeth came downstairs with 2 suitcases. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown, she announced, not looking at me. My lawyer will be in touch. Your lawyer? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happened to our lawyer? Oh, that's right. We can't afford the kind of lawyers you work with. She paused at the door. You humiliated me last night, Jack, in front of the neighbors. That video is probably all over social media by now. Good. Maybe people should know what kind of woman they're dealing with. What kind of woman? Her voice turned sharp as a blade. The kind who got tired of being married to a man with no ambition? The kind who wanted more than a construction worker's salary and a pickup truck older than our son? The words hit their target. Elizabeth had always been good with words. It's what made her a successful attorney. But I'd learned a few things about fighting over the years. You're right, Liz. I'm just a construction worker. But I'm the construction worker who put you through law school. I'm the construction worker who worked 60-hour weeks so you could take unpaid internships at fancy law firms. I'm the construction worker who never complained when you missed dinner because you were networking with people like Carson. She had the decency to look uncomfortable. That's not fair. Fair? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. You want to talk about fair? Fair would have been talking to me if you were unhappy. Fair would have been marriage counseling. Fair would have been not screwing your boss in the bed I paid for. I want a divorce, Jack. I figured. What else do you want? The house? My truck? Maybe my tools too, so you can sell them and buy yourself something pretty. I want half of everything. It's community property. I nodded slowly. Half of everything. including half of nothing, which is about what we've got in the bank thanks to your student loans and credit card bills. After she left, the house felt different. Emptier, but also cleaner somehow, like an infected wound that had finally been drained. I called my boss and told him I needed a few days off. Tom Bradley had been running Bradley Construction for 30 years and had seen his share of personal disasters. Take all the time you need, Jack. The Morrison job can wait. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even the job sites were named after me, but I'd never be rich enough to afford the houses I built. I drove to the hospital to check on Sam. He was sitting up in bed, picking at a breakfast tray that looked like it had been assembled by someone who'd only heard food described secondhand. "How you feeling, champ?" "Like I got thrown down a flight of stairs by two gorillas." He managed a weak smile. "But the doctor says I'll be back to normal in 6 weeks. Well, physically anyway." "What do you mean?" Sam looked out the window. "I keep thinking about what I saw, Dad. Mom and that guy. It's like, I don't know who she is anymore." I sat down in the uncomfortable visitor's chair. "People change, Sam. Sometimes they become who they really were all along and we just didn't see it." "Are you getting divorced?" "Looks that way." "Good." The word surprised me. "Good?" "Dad, I've been watching this for months. The way she talks to you like you're some kind of servant. The way she acts embarrassed when her lawyer friends come over and see her work clothes. I've been wanting to say something, but what? But I didn't want to hurt you." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You're a good kid, Sam. Better than I deserve." "What are you going to do now?" That was the million-dollar question. What was I going to do? I was 42 years old, about to be divorced, with a construction worker's salary and a son in college. Elizabeth would get half of everything, which meant half of not much. She'd probably get alimony too, since she'd given up her promising career to support my limited ambitions. "I'm going to figure it out," I told him, "one day at a time." But as I drove home, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Elizabeth and Carson had made this personal when they involved my son. They'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And if they thought Jack Morrison was going to roll over and play dead, they were about to learn how wrong they could be. I spent the afternoon in my garage, supposedly working on the truck, but really just thinking. The neighborhood was quiet. Most people were at work, living their normal lives while mine fell apart. But I could feel the eyes watching from behind curtains. The video Mrs. Dalrymple had taken was probably making the rounds on Facebook and Instagram. By tomorrow, everyone in town would know that Jack Morrison's wife was cheating on him with her rich boss. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my best friend Mike Hendricks. "Jack, buddy, I just heard. Are you okay?" Mike and I had been friends since high school. He ran a small auto repair shop downtown and was one of the few people who'd never made me feel like a failure for not reaching my potential. "I'm peachy, Mike. Living the dream." "Cut the crap. Sarah saw the video. Half the town's talking about it." Sarah was Mike's wife, and she had her finger on the pulse of every piece of gossip in our small city. If Sarah knew, everyone knew. What are they saying? Mixed reactions. Some people are saying you went too far, pulling a tool and all. Others are saying Carson had it coming. And what do you say? I say the bastard's lucky you didn't shoot him. That made me smile for the first time all day. "Want to grab a beer tonight? I could use some normal conversation." "Can't tonight, buddy. Sarah's got some work thing." "But how about tomorrow?" "Sure, tomorrow." But tomorrow would bring its own problems. As I hung up the phone, I had no idea how quickly my world was about to get even smaller. The next morning, I woke up to find my truck's windshield spiderwebbed with cracks. Someone had thrown a rock through it during the night, along with a note, "Keep your mouth shut, or next time it's your face." I stood in my driveway, holding the crumpled paper, feeling the neighborhood's eyes on me again. This was Carson's work. Had to be. The man had connections, money, and apparently no problem escalating things. My phone buzzed. Tom Bradley. "Jack, we need to talk. Can you come in this morning?" 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Tom's cramped office above the construction yard, watching my boss of 15 years struggle to meet my eyes. "This is hard for me, Jack. You're the best foreman I've ever had. But I can't afford trouble with the City Planning Commission, or the Zoning Board, or any of the other bureaucrats who can shut me down with a phone call." I felt my stomach drop. "Carson got to you." "He didn't have to. His law firm represents half the contractors in the city. Word gets around that Tom Bradley employs unstable employees who threaten people with tools. He spread his hands helplessly. So I'm fired. I'm sorry, Jack, I really am. I'll give you 2 weeks severance and a good reference for anyone outside the city. Outside the city. Like I was some kind of exile. I cleaned out my desk without saying goodbye to the crew. These were men I'd worked alongside for years, but I could see the way they looked at me now. Like I was radioactive, toxic, a problem they didn't want to catch. The drive home felt longer than usual. I was unemployed, soon to be divorced, and apparently persona non grata in my own hometown. But the worst was yet to come. That evening, Mike called to cancel our beer plans. Something's come up, buddy. Rain check? Sure. Everything okay? A pause. Yeah, everything's fine. Just, you know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. Mike's shop depended on referrals and word of mouth. Being seen with Jack Morrison, the crazy guy who pulled tools on prominent citizens, wouldn't be good for business. Over the next few days, the pattern repeated itself. Old friends suddenly became unavailable. Neighbors who used to wave from their yards now looked the other way. The guy at the hardware store where I'd been shopping for 20 years treated me like a stranger. Elizabeth's lawyer called on Thursday, a woman named Patricia Vance who spoke in the clipped, efficient tones of someone who billed by the minute. Mr. Morrison, I represent your wife in the dissolution of your marriage. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss the division of assets and spousal support. Spousal support? Mrs. Morrison sacrificed her career advancement to support your household. She's entitled to compensation for that sacrifice. I almost laughed. Elizabeth made more money than I did, and had for the past 3 years. But apparently in divorce court, that didn't matter. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at the law offices of Blackwell Carson and Associates, the same building where Elizabeth worked, the same building where her boyfriend was senior partner. Isn't that a conflict of interest? I asked. Mr. Carson has recused himself from any involvement in this matter. Mrs. Vance is handling everything independently. Sure she was. I spent the weekend alone, rattling around the empty house like a ghost, haunting his own life. Sam was back at school, his leg healing, but still requiring crutches. He called Saturday night. Dad, some of the guys here saw that video. They're giving me crap about it. What kind of crap? Just, jokes about my crazy dad, asking if you're going to show up here with a tool. Even my son was feeling the backlash. The rage that had been simmering in my chest for days began to crystallize into something harder and colder. Sam, listen to me. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. What happened wasn't your fault. And it wasn't wrong. Sometimes a man has to stand up for his family, even if other people don't understand. I know, Dad, but it's hard. I know it is, but it's going to get better. I promise. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and really thought about my situation for the first time. I was 42 years old, unemployed, and about to lose half of everything I owned to a woman who'd been cheating on me. My friends had abandoned me, my reputation was destroyed, and even my son was suffering because of my actions. Most men in my position would have started drinking, or gotten depressed, or maybe just accepted defeat and tried to rebuild somewhere else, but I wasn't most men. I was a man who'd survived 2 combat tours, who'd built a life from nothing, who'd worked every day for 20 years to provide for his family, and I was a man who'd been pushed too far. Richard Carson wanted to play games? Fine. But he was about to learn that some games have consequences he never imagined. I spent Sunday planning, not revenge. That was too crude, too simple. I was planning justice. There's a difference, and it matters. Carson had used his money and connections to destroy my life. He'd cost me my job, my friends, and my reputation. He'd put my son in the hospital and stolen my wife. And he'd done it all with the smug confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. That was about to change. Monday morning, I put on my only good suit, the one I'd worn to my wedding and my father's funeral, and drove downtown to the offices of Blackwell Carson and Associates. The building was one of those glass and steel monuments to success that had sprouted up during the city's brief economic revival in the early 2000s. Patricia Vance was everything I'd expected: sharp, professional, and expensive. She laid out Elizabeth's demands with the efficiency of a surgeon removing organs. Mrs. Morrison is seeking 50% of all marital assets, including the house, vehicles, and retirement accounts. She's also requesting spousal support in the amount of $3,000 per month for a period of 5 years. I did the math in my head. Elizabeth wanted the house I'd been paying for, half my pension, and enough monthly support to maintain her lifestyle while she played house with Carson. What if I refuse? Then we'll see you in court, where a judge will likely award her even more, plus attorney's fees. And if I agree, we can have the papers signed by the end of the week. I pretended to consider it. I need some time to think. Of course, but don't take too long, Mr. Morrison. Cooperation now will save everyone a lot of unpleasantness. As I left the building, I caught a glimpse of Carson through the glass wall of his corner office. He was on the phone, probably destroying someone else's life with the same casual indifference he'd shown mine. But I also noticed something else. His office was on the 15th floor, and the building's security was minimal. Just a bored guard at the front desk and some cameras that probably hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. That afternoon, I drove to the public library and spent 3 hours researching Richard Carson. Public records, newspaper articles, social media posts, everything I could find about the man who'd decided to make me his enemy. What I found was interesting. Carson wasn't just Elizabeth's boss and lover. He was also a pillar of the community, a member of the city council, and the chairman of 3 different charity boards. His law firm handled municipal contracts worth millions of dollars. He was married to a woman named Margaret, who came from old money and spent her time organizing fundraisers for the symphony and the art museum. More importantly, Carson had enemies, lots of them. Disgruntled clients, political rivals, business competitors who'd been squeezed out of lucrative city contracts. The man had made a career of stepping on people, confident that his money and connections would protect him from any consequences. But money and connections couldn't protect him from everything, especially not from a man who had nothing left to lose. I spent the next 2 days watching. Carson's routine was predictable. Arrive at the office by 8, lunch at the country club, home by 6 to his mansion on the hill. He drove the same black Mercedes I'd seen in my driveway, and he always parked in the same reserved spot in the building's underground garage. On Wednesday evening, I put my plan into motion. The building's security guard knocked off at midnight, leaving only the automated systems. I'd learned during my research that the parking garage's cameras had been broken for 6 months, a budget dispute between the building management and the security company. I waited until 12:30 a.m., then slipped into the garage through a maintenance entrance I'd scouted earlier. Carson's Mercedes sat in its designated spot like a sleeping predator. I didn't damage it. That would have been too obvious, too crude. Instead, I did something much more subtle. I planted a small GPS tracking device under the rear bumper, the kind hunters use to track their dogs, available at any sporting goods store for $50. Then I placed a manila envelope under his windshield wiper. Inside was a single photograph. Carson and Elizabeth in a passionate embrace outside the Marriott Hotel, taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. On the back, I'd written, "Your wife Margaret might find this interesting. So might the Ethics Board of the State Bar Association." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The next morning, I watched from a coffee shop across the street as Carson discovered the envelope. Even from a distance, I could see his face go pale as he looked at the photograph. He spent several minutes on his phone, probably calling Elizabeth, probably trying to figure out who was responsible. But that was just the opening move. Phase 2 began that afternoon. I'd spent years working construction in this city, which meant I knew people in every trade. Electricians, plumbers, maintenance workers, the invisible army of blue-collar workers who kept the white-collar world running. My friend Danny Kowalski worked for the company that serviced the building's elevators. For $200 cash, he was willing to share some information about the building's layout and security systems. "The executive floors have card key access," he told me over coffee at a diner on the east side. "But the cleaning crew has master keys. They come in around 10 p.m., usually done by midnight." What about the offices themselves? Most of them are just regular locks, nothing fancy. The lawyers figure the building security is enough. What about cameras on the floors? Just in the hallways. Nothing in the individual offices. I thanked Danny and slipped him an extra 100. This conversation never happened. What conversation? That night, I became a ghost. I'd learned urban camouflage in the Middle East, where the difference between invisible and dead was often measured in heartbeats. Moving through an empty office building was child's play compared to stalking through Kandahar. I waited until the cleaning crew finished the 15th floor, then slipped past the card reader using a technique I'd learned from a former Special Forces buddy who'd gone into private security. It involved a small electronic device that cost me $500, but was worth every penny. Carson's office was exactly what I'd expected. Mahogany furniture, leather chairs, and law books that probably hadn't been opened since law school. His computer was password protected, but his desk wasn't. I spent 20 minutes photographing documents with my phone. Billing records, client files, correspondence with city officials. Nothing illegal, but plenty that would be embarrassing if it became public. Evidence of the kind of backroom dealing and influence peddling that kept men like Carson in power. But the real prize was in his personal files. Love letters from Elizabeth, detailing not just their affair, but her contempt for her pathetic husband. Financial records showing expensive gifts Carson had bought her, hotel receipts from their weekend getaways, and something even better, a letter from the State Bar Association regarding a complaint filed against Carson by a former client. The complaint had been dismissed, but the letter made it clear that Carson was walking a fine line between aggressive representation and ethical violations. I photographed everything, then arranged the files exactly as I'd found them. Carson would never know I'd been there, but the information I'd gathered would be invaluable for what came next. As I slipped out of the building, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Not for reconciliation or forgiveness, but for something much more satisfying: justice. Friday morning brought the first sign that my plan was working. I was having coffee at Murphy's Diner, one of the few places in town where I was still welcome, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park noon. Come alone. Elizabeth." She'd gotten a new phone number, probably at Carson's suggestion, but she was scared enough to reach out, which meant the photograph had hit its target. I arrived at the park 10 minutes early and positioned myself at a picnic table with clear sight lines in all directions. Old habits from the military. Never walk into a meeting without knowing your exits. Elizabeth showed up right on time, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her typical power suit. "You look terrible," I said as she sat down across from me. "Thanks. You look like heck yourself." She wasn't wrong. I'd lost about 10 pounds since this whole thing started, and I was running on coffee and determination. "What do you want, Liz? I want you to stop this. Whatever game you're playing, it needs to end." "Game?" I leaned back and studied her face. "You think this is a game?" "The photograph, Jack. We know it was you." "What photograph?" "Don't play dumb. The one you left on Richard's car." I shrugged. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but it sounds like someone's been keeping an eye on you two lovebirds." Her face flushed with anger. "This is harassment, Jack. We could have you arrested." "For what? Taking pictures in public? Last I checked, that wasn't illegal." "You're stalking us." "I'm documenting adultery for divorce proceedings. My lawyer says it's perfectly legal." That was a lie. I couldn't afford a lawyer. But Elizabeth didn't know that. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want justice." "What does that mean?" "It means I want you and your boyfriend to face consequences for your actions. Real consequences." "Richard didn't do anything wrong." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He put our son in the hospital, Liz. He destroyed my career. He's been screwing another man's wife in that man's bed. If that's not wrong, I don't know what is. Sam shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have interfered. He shouldn't have had to see his mother betraying his father." We stared at each other across the picnic table, 23 years of marriage reduced to this moment of mutual hatred. "The divorce papers are ready," she said finally. "Sign them, take your settlement, and move on with your life. And if I don't, then things are going to get very unpleasant for you. More unpleasant than losing my job. More unpleasant than losing my friends. More unpleasant than watching my son get hurt because of your choices." She stood up. "Sign the papers, Jack. Don't make this harder than it has to be." After she left, I sat in the park for another hour, watching families play with their children and couples walk hand in hand. Normal people living normal lives, blissfully unaware that their world could be destroyed by a single act of betrayal. That evening, I put Phase 3 into motion. I'd spent years in this town, working on construction projects, meeting people, building relationships. I knew which city councilman was having an affair with his secretary. I knew which building inspector could be bought for the price of a good meal. I knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. More importantly, I knew that Richard Carson had made enemies during his climb to the top. People who'd been stepped on, squeezed out, or simply ignored. People who would be very interested in the information I'd gathered from his office. My first call was to Janet Morrison, no relation, despite the name, a reporter for the city's weekly newspaper. Janet had been trying to expose corruption in the city government for years, but she'd never had enough evidence to make anything stick. Jack, I heard about your troubles. I'm sorry. Thanks, Janet, but I'm not calling for sympathy. I'm calling because I have something you might find interesting. Oh? Information about how certain city contracts are awarded. Information about relationships between law firms and city officials. Information that might make a heck of a story. There was a pause. What kind of information? The kind that comes with documentation. Photos, letters, financial records. Where did you get this information? Does it matter? The question is, are you interested? I am interested, but I need to verify everything independently. I wouldn't expect anything less. We arranged to meet the next day. Janet was a good reporter, thorough, ethical, and fearless. If the information I gave her was as damaging as I thought it was, Carson would be facing a lot more than embarrassment. My second call was to Margaret Carson. I'd found her number in the phone book. Apparently, she still believed in such quaint things as listed phone numbers. She answered on the third ring, her voice cultured and refined. Mrs. Carson, my name is Jack Morrison. I think we need to talk. I'm sorry. Do I know you? No, ma'am, but you know my wife, Elizabeth Morrison. She works for your husband. A long pause. I see. I have some photographs I think you might find interesting. Pictures of your husband and my wife. Pictures that might explain why your husband has been working so many late nights recently. Mr. Morrison, I don't think this is appropriate. Neither is adultery, Mrs. Carson, but here we are. Another pause. What do you want? I want to meet with you, somewhere private, somewhere we can have an honest conversation about what our spouses have been doing. I need to think about this. Of course, but don't think too long, Mrs. Carson. These photographs have a way of finding their way into public view if they're not handled properly. I hung up before she could respond. Margaret Carson came from old money, old values, the kind of woman who would see adultery as a personal humiliation and a public scandal. She wouldn't just be angry, she'd be vengeful. And a vengeful wife with money and connections could do a lot more damage than an unemployed construction worker with a grudge. The pieces were falling into place. Carson thought he'd won by destroying my life, but he'd made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that Jack Morrison would just roll over and accept defeat. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. Saturday morning, Margaret Carson called me back. Mr. Morrison, I've been thinking about our conversation. And? I'd like to see those photographs. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town, far from the country club crowd and society pages where Margaret usually appeared. She was a handsome woman in her early 50s, with the kind of understated elegance that only comes from generations of breeding and money. I slid the manila envelope across the table. She opened it with steady hands, but I could see her jaw tighten as she looked at each photograph, her husband and my wife, caught in moments of intimacy that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. How long? She asked without looking up. I don't know exactly. Months, at least. I suspected. Richard's been different lately. Distracted. More concerned with his appearance. She closed the envelope. What do you want from me, Mr. Morrison? I want Richard Carson to face consequences for his actions. He destroyed my marriage, my career, and my reputation. He put my son in the hospital, and he did it all with the smug confidence of a man who thinks he's untouchable. And you think I can help you touch him? I think a wife has certain advantages in a situation like this. Legal advantages. Financial advantages. Margaret Carson was quiet for a long moment, staring out the cafe window at the parking lot where her silver Lexus sat next to my battered pickup truck. Richard and I have been married for 28 years, she said finally. We have 2 children, both grown. We have a life together, a place in the community. I understand. Do you? Do you understand what it means to throw away nearly 3 decades of marriage? To become the subject of gossip and speculation? To admit publicly that your husband preferred a younger woman? I understand that staying married to a man who cheats on you isn't really living. It's just existing. She looked at me with something that might have been respect. You're not what I expected, Mr. Morrison. What did you expect? A crude, angry man looking for revenge. Someone I could dismiss and forget about. And instead? Instead, I find a man who's been wronged, just like I have. A man who wants justice, just like I do. She picked up the envelope. May I keep these? They're yours. What happens now? Now we both do what we have to do. That afternoon, I met with Janet Morrison at a coffee shop downtown. She'd spent the morning reviewing the documents I'd given her, and her eyes were bright with the excitement that only a reporter gets when they smell a big story. This is incredible, Jack. If even half of this checks out, it's going to blow the lid off city government. What's your timeline? I need at least a week to verify sources and get comments from the people involved. But this could be front-page material. What about Carson specifically? The billing records show he's been charging the city premium rates for work that was probably done by junior associates. The correspondence suggests he's been influencing zoning decisions that benefited his clients. It's not criminal, but it's definitely unethical. Unethical enough to get him in trouble with the Bar Association? Possibly, especially combined with his personal behavior. I left Janet to her investigation and drove across town to visit my son. Sam was back in his dorm room, his leg still in a cast, but healing well. His roommate was out, giving us privacy to talk. How are you holding up, Dad? I'm managing. How about you? Still getting grief from the other students? Some, but it's dying down. Most people have moved on to other gossip. Good. I'm sorry you got dragged into this, Sam. I'm not sorry I tried to defend you and our family. I just wish I'd been stronger. You were strong enough. Sometimes being strong means knowing when to retreat and fight another day. Is that what you're doing? Fighting another day? I looked at my son. Really looked at him. He was 19 years old, smart, decent, and trying to figure out how to be a man in a world that seemed increasingly complicated. He deserved better than the mess his parents had created. I'm trying to make things right, I told him. Not just for me, but for you. For all the people Carson has stepped on over the years. Be careful, Dad. These people have money and power. They can hurt you. They already have hurt me, Sam. The question now is whether I'm going to let them get away with it. Sunday was quiet. I spent the morning working on my truck. The windshield had been replaced, but the engine still needed attention. Physical work helped me think, helped me plan. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Morrison. Mr. Morrison, this is Margaret Carson. I wanted to let you know that I've filed for divorce. My attorney served Richard with papers this morning. How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. He's claiming it's all a misunderstanding, that he can explain everything. Can he? Not to my satisfaction. I've also frozen our joint accounts and changed the locks on the house. I whistled softly. You don't mess around. 28 years of marriage teaches you a few things about warfare, Mr. Morrison. Richard is about to learn that I'm not the decorative wife he thought I was. What happens now? Now my attorney starts the process of dividing our assets. Richard is going to discover that being married to a woman with family money has certain disadvantages when that woman decides she's had enough. After she hung up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Carson was about to face attacks on multiple fronts: his marriage, his reputation, and possibly his career. But I wasn't done yet. Monday morning brought news that Carson had taken a leave of absence from his law firm. According to the official statement, he was dealing with personal family matters and would be stepping back from his duties indefinitely. Elizabeth called that afternoon. You bastard, she said without preamble. Hello to you too, Liz. Richard's wife threw him out. He's staying in a hotel, his partners are asking questions, and there are rumors that some reporter is investigating the firm. Sounds like karma to me. This is your doing. All of it. I didn't make Richard cheat on his wife. I didn't make him put our son in the hospital. I didn't make him destroy my career. You're destroying his life. He destroyed mine first. What do you want, Jack? What will it take to make this stop? I thought about it. What did I want? I wanted my old life back, but that was impossible. I wanted my marriage back, but I didn't want Elizabeth anymore. I wanted my job back, but I'd never be able to work in this town again. I want justice, I said finally. What does that look like? It looks like consequences, real consequences, for both of you. And then what? You'll leave us alone? Then we'll see. I hung up and sat back in my kitchen chair. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Dalrymple working in her garden. She waved when she saw me looking, the first friendly gesture I'd received from a neighbor in weeks. Maybe the tide was starting to turn. Maybe people were beginning to see that Jack Morrison wasn't the villain in this story. Or maybe they just loved watching powerful people fall from grace. Either way, I was just getting started. Tuesday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Janet Morrison's story hit the front page of the City Weekly with a headline that made me smile. City contracts and conflicts. Law firm's cozy relationship with officials raises questions. The article was devastating. Janet had done her homework, interviewing sources, verifying documents, and building an airtight case against Carson and his firm. The story detailed years of questionable billing practices, influence peddling, and backroom dealing that had cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the real bombshell was in the sidebar story. Prominent attorney's marriage crumbles amid scandal. Janet had somehow gotten Margaret Carson to go on the record about the divorce, and Margaret hadn't pulled any punches. "I discovered that my husband had been having an affair with a subordinate," she was quoted as saying. "When I confronted him with evidence, he showed no remorse. This is not the man I married 28 years ago." My phone started ringing at 8 a.m., reporters mostly wanting to interview the wronged husband whose wife had been named in the scandal. I ignored them all except for one call from Tom Bradley. "Jack, Tom, I just read the paper. And I think maybe I made a mistake letting you go. Turns out Carson's firm has been putting pressure on a lot of contractors in town, threatening to pull city work if they didn't play ball." "Is that so? I'm not saying I can give you your old job back right away, but maybe in a few weeks, when this all dies down, I'll think about it, Tom." But I wouldn't be thinking about it for long. I had bigger plans now. Wednesday brought a call from Patricia Vance, Elizabeth's attorney. "Mr. Morrison, I think we need to revise our settlement offer." "Oh?" "Given the recent developments, my client is prepared to be more reasonable about the division of assets." "How reasonable?" "She'll take 30% instead of 50%. And she's willing to waive spousal support." I almost laughed. A week ago, Elizabeth had wanted to take me for everything I had. Now she was scrambling to minimize her losses. "I'll consider it," I told Vance. "Please don't take too long. The situation is quite fluid right now." Fluid was one way to put it. Explosive was another. That afternoon, I got a call I hadn't expected. Richard Carson himself. "Morrison, we need to talk." "Do we? Meet me at Murphy's Diner. 1 hour. "I don't think so, Dick. You want to talk, you come to my house. The one where you were screwing my wife." A long pause. "Fine. I'll be there in an hour." Carson looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled. He sat across from me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast with Elizabeth for 20 years. "You've made your point," he said without preamble. "Have I? My marriage is over. My career is in jeopardy. The State Bar Association is launching an investigation. You've destroyed everything I spent 30 years building." "Good. What do you want from me?" I studied his face. Richard Carson had been a handsome man, confident and powerful. Now he looked defeated, desperate. "I want you to understand something," I said. "You thought you could take whatever you wanted. My wife, my dignity, my son's respect without any consequences. You thought Jack Morrison was just some blue-collar nobody who would roll over and play dead. I never meant for your son to get hurt. But he did get hurt, because you brought muscle to intimidate a 19-year-old kid who was defending his family." Carson looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry about that. Sorry doesn't fix a broken leg. Sorry doesn't undo the humiliation. What do you want me to do?" "I want you to pay." "How much?" I shook my head. "Not money, Dick. Money's too easy for people like you. I want you to pay in the currency that matters most to men like you. Reputation. My reputation is already destroyed. Not completely. You still have friends, connections, people who owe you favors. You could probably weather this scandal, rebuild your practice, start over. And you're going to prevent that? I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Every client you screwed over, every contractor you squeezed, every person you stepped on during your climb to the top. They're all going to hear the whole story." Carson's face went pale. "That's not just revenge, Morrison. That's destruction. Sometimes they're the same thing." He left without another word, and I watched through my window as he drove away in his damaged Mercedes. I felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a cold sense of completion. Thursday brought the final piece of the puzzle. Margaret Carson called to invite me to lunch. We met at the country club, her idea, not mine. She wanted to make a statement, to show the gossips and social climbers that she wasn't hiding in shame. "The divorce will be final next month," she told me over salad and iced tea. Richard will get very little. Prenuptial agreement, you see. My family insisted on it when we married. What will you do now? Travel, perhaps. Spend time with my children. Maybe start a foundation to help other women in similar situations. And Richard? Richard will have to find a way to survive on his own merits. It should be an interesting challenge for him. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. Inside was a check for $50,000. What's this for? Consider it a consulting fee. Your information was quite valuable in my divorce proceedings. I can't take this. Of course you can. You've lost your job, your marriage is ending, and you have a son in college. Consider it an investment in your future. I stared at the check. $50,000 was more money than I'd ever seen at one time. It was enough to start over, maybe in another city where nobody knew my story. There's one condition, Margaret said, which is, Richard Carson has been punished enough. His career is over, his marriage is over, his reputation is destroyed. Let it end here. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. It ends here. Friday morning, Elizabeth came to the house to collect the last of her belongings. She looked tired, older somehow, like the events of the past few weeks had finally caught up with her. I signed the divorce papers, she said, not looking at me. I know. My copy's on the table. She loaded her boxes into her car, not the luxury SUV she'd been driving, but a modest sedan. Apparently, her relationship with Carson hadn't survived the scandal. What will you do now? I asked as she prepared to leave. I don't know. Look for another job, I suppose. Start over. In another city? Probably. My reputation here is, she shrugged, destroyed, damaged beyond repair. We stood there for a moment, two people who'd once loved each other enough to promise forever, now strangers sharing nothing but regret. I'm sorry, Jack, she said finally, for all of it. So am I, Liz. So am I. After she left, I walked through the empty house one last time. 20 years of memories, good and bad, reduced to echoes and dust. But I felt lighter somehow, like a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. My phone rang. Sam. Dad, I just heard about the settlement. Are you okay? I'm fine, son. Better than fine. What happens now? Now we start over, both of us. Together. If you want. I want. I smiled, looking out the window at the street where I'd lived for 2 decades. Tomorrow I'd put the house on the market and start looking for a new place to live. Maybe in another state, somewhere with better opportunities and fewer memories. But tonight, I was content to sit in my kitchen and savor the taste of justice served cold. Richard Carson would spend the rest of his life rebuilding from nothing, learning what it felt like to be powerless and alone. Elizabeth would start over too, carrying the weight of her choices wherever she went. And Jack Morrison? Jack Morrison had learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting ahead. I picked up my phone and dialed Tom Bradley's number. Tom, it's Jack. About that job offer, I'm going to have to pass. I'm thinking of starting my own company. Your own company? Morrison Construction. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? With Margaret Carson's $50,000 as seed money and 20 years of experience in the construction business, I could build something of my own. Something that nobody could take away from me. The phone rang again. This time it was Mike Hendricks. Jack. Buddy, I've been reading the papers. Sounds like you came out on top after all. Something like that. How about that beer we never got around to having? I looked around my empty house one last time, then grabbed my keys. I'll meet you at Murphy's in 20 minutes. As I drove across town, I thought about the past few weeks. I'd lost a wife, a job, and a house. But I'd gained something more valuable. Self-respect. Richard Carson had thought he could destroy Jack Morrison without consequences. He'd been wrong about that, just like he'd been wrong about a lot of things. Sometimes the little guy wins. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes the bastards get exactly what they deserve. And sometimes that's enough.